I'll teach you about what watts, volts, and amps are. They're basic electrical terms, very basic electrical terms, and they're very poorly explained, I think. Voltage is like a measure of the energy behind each electron. Let's say this is an electron, and I throw it that high, or that hard. It's not a whole lot of energy that I'm transmitting with this electron. But if I throw it really hard, it'll do more damage and do more work for each unit that travels by or hits, whatever. Voltage is like the speed of something hitting something. Now, amperage is the number of these passing a certain point per second. So like a thick line of ants might have more amperage than a thin line of ants. Watts is like the amount of work done. So if you throw 10 of these at 10 miles an hour, it's going to do the same work as one of these at 100 miles an hour. You get it? So voltage is like the speed of each electron, and amps is the number of electrons, and then wattage is kind of like an overview of the two, showing the amount of work that can be done. So, does that make sense to you?
Should I stop it?
Sure.
So in all these electronic circuits, you have like a loop of electricity from the positive to the negative parts of the circuit. And that loop, it doesn't connect, basically, when it's not powering anything. It's a really long, complicated loop. But when you put something in that can be powered by electricity, and that extracts some energy to do some work, and if it has a power switch, if you turn it on, the electrons flow around through there, and they lose some of the energy to the device. And that's how things are powered. When you have what's called a short circuit, when there's kind of a direct path from the positive wires of the circuit to the negative wires, maximal energy is transferred through this now shorter circuit. And it causes welding and sparks, and it's kind of dangerous. So we're trying to avoid short circuits with circuit breakers and fuses.
Bad news, your car doesn't create a whole lot of power, typically. So if you're trying to run drills and stuff, you're going to need a good alternator or a battery bank, not the starting battery that comes with your vehicle. So for short bursts of power, your starting battery is excellent at that. It's designed for that, but it's not designed to be left uncharged. So if you're not going to be running your vehicle after you use a bit of its electricity, it's going to really hurt it. So it's not good. So if you're running a drill for 30 seconds or something, no problem, as long as your inverter can handle it. Alright, so some more tidbits about your battery. A, it takes a while to recharge, so if you discharge it a bit, you're going to need to give it time. Your alternator, even if you have a high power alternator, isn't going to just charge it up instantaneously. And B, if you need to learn more about batteries and the capacity and how long it takes to charge them, I recommend going to batteryfaq.org. Another tidbit about alternators, they aren't really designed to sustainingly deliver the maximum rated power. I imagine that some are, but I believe most aren't. I heard a good figure is maybe you can sap 2/3 of its rated power pretty consistently. So you'll have to look into that.
Okay, rolling.
So unless you're working with an electric vehicle or a hybrid, If you're working with one of these old-fashioned, good old vehicles, then you're probably going to have an alternator, and it's probably going to be running at 12 volts, and that's kind of important. Alternators produce various amounts of power. Stock alternators, like from the dealership kind of alternators, they typically come in energy production levels between 60 amps and 150 amps. My little old car has a 60 amp alternator. Your nice new Beamer might have a 150 amp alternator. This is upgradable. For my vehicle, I know I can purchase a 200 ampere alternator, and for other vehicles they come up to 300 amps. Diesels typically have 24 volt systems, I think. Maybe not typically, but often. So watch out. Just make sure you know what kind of alternator you're dealing with. Some people, they need to create a lot of power. So what they do is they take this belt that's running behind this plastic housing, and then they build a structure, and on that structure they mount a bunch of alternators, and they run this belt along the wheels connected to these alternators, and they can have like 4 alternators in there. So you could create maybe 1,000 amps of power if you really wanted to. That would be 12 kilowatts. That's a lot of power. So if you want to upgrade your vehicle, you can create a lot of juice to run whatever you want to run. Potential's there. You just have to spend the money on it. Do the work. And as far as batteries go, they kind of act as your buffer, but with these starting batteries, basically you're not going to want to use that to power your devices, so you're going to want to have the vehicle on while you're doing your stuff. Now, another thing about these alternators is that typically when you're idling the vehicle, they'll produce maybe 1/5 of their rated capacity. So this might create, or none at all. It might create 15 amps when I'm idling, and a lot of that might go toward powering the car, so you won't have a whole lot to work with. But yeah, if you need to learn more about it, go elsewhere. And another thing, like, this will produce its maximal current, I think, while the engine is rotating at about maybe 3,000 RPMs. And anywhere between that idling speed and that 3,000 RPMs or so, you're going to have a kind of curved gradient. So maybe at 2,000 RPMs I might be creating like 50 amps, and at 3,000, 60 amps. But at 1,000 I might be creating 15 amps. Here's a graph showing you an alternator, a few alternator outputs from another company.
Please bear in mind that the rotor RPM, as you can see in this graph, is not the RPMs of your crankshaft. It is not the RPMs displayed on your tachometer. It is the RPMs of the rotor attached to your alternator, which is driven by the belt which is attached to your crankshaft. It is not the speed of your crankshaft.